hopefully you've joined us today because you want to know more about how teaching English at undergraduate level and how learning is very different at university to what you're experiencing in an A-level classroom. So fortunately, it's not going to be me talking about that. I'm going to introduce my wonderful colleague, Eleanor Baker. Eleanor is one of our tutors, one of our English tutors at Balliol College. And she also has a particular position in terms of being the lead person for English on our foundation course. So I've done lots and lots of work really in helping students make that transition successfully. So I know Eleanor has a presentation to give to you, but there will be lots of opportunities to ask your questions later on. So without further ado, Eleanor, welcome.
Hi, Pravahi. Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. Excellent. Thank you so many of you for turning up on what is in Oxford an incredibly hot day. I do appreciate you taking time to sit on your phone or sit on your laptops and listen to me talk. But as Pravahi said, so today's session is called Mind the Gap, moving from A-level English to an English literature degree. And it's going to be about all of the ways that your teaching, your reading, your assessment changes between what you're doing now or what you might be doing next year and what you can expect to experience as part of an undergraduate degree. Yes, so my name is Eleanor Baker and I am a lecturer at Balliol in Old and Middle English, so the earliest kinds of English literature that you can possibly get, but don't worry, this session is not going to be about that literature today. And as she mentioned, I'm also the English subject lead for the University of Oxford's Astrophoria Foundation Year programme, which is all about helping students who are incredibly intellectually able but have experienced some kind of disadvantage in their lives, which means that they need an extra leg up to help them transition to undergraduate study here at Oxford or anywhere else. So to run you through a quick outline of what we'll be doing today. So I'm going to break it down into several different parts. So firstly, what we're going to be looking at closely is the differences in teaching, reading, writing, and assessment between A-level and undergraduate study. And I'm going to offer you some tips on how you can manage this change. So ways that you can prepare yourself, or the particular things that you might want to think about in advance of starting your studies. Then I'm going to move on to discussing how you go about finding the best undergraduate course for you. So English literature or English literature and language is offered at most universities in the UK. However, those courses will be different at every university, and those universities will have very different identities as well. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what kind of things might differ and what you might want to look for in your university course. And then finally, I'm going to give you some advice and some resources on how you might want to prepare for undergraduate study. So I'm going to show you some places that you can look for honing your close reading skills or looking for wider reading and critical responses over the summer holidays, for example. Oh, please excuse my dodgy pause. My laptop wants to wake up for a moment. So firstly, to focus on the things that change between A-level and undergraduate study. The first thing we're going to look at is teaching. Please do excuse me if you feel like I'm telling you what you already know, but it helps for me to outline what you're experiencing currently in your A-level teaching, and then to reflect forwards on how that would change for undergraduate. So at the moment, if you're doing your A-level studies, you have class sizes of maybe around 10 to 20 students or more if it's a very popular subject. And you're taught by subject specialist teachers, so people who are trained to teach your particular subject. Your actively taught material often in several classes a week. And what I mean by that is that the vast majority of subject knowledge that you're acquiring, you're getting from being in those classes. So while you might be asked to do some reading outside of the class, the vast majority of what you're getting is told to you by your teacher, is taught to you by your teacher in the form of discussions, particular exercises, things like that. Now, the kind of things that you study for A-level are structured around an exam board syllabus. So as you all know, your college, your sixth form will have chosen a particular syllabus to work from, and the texts that you study are dictated by that syllabus. So to pass the exam or to do well at the exam, you need to talk about those particular texts. You're often prompted with particular activities. So you might receive homework that asks you to research a very particular subject. You might be told to go away and read particular chapters or to think about a particular concept. And you have regular check-ins from your teachers as well. So for example, they might call you in to talk about your work. You might have reports at the end of every term which tell you how you're doing, or a teacher might give you kind of feedback in the class about how that's going as well. So how that changes in undergraduate teaching is there's different kinds of teaching that happens. So the first kind of teaching you might get are called lectures, which is where you usually have one or maybe a few speakers who are experts, and you're basically sitting and listening. It's going to a talk and recording that information for yourself, usually by writing notes. So that is someone who is talking at you, and it's up to you to collect that knowledge in the way that you find valuable. The next kind of teaching are called seminars. Now, this will be the part that's most familiar to you from your A-level studies. Seminars are not dissimilar from classes. They're smaller groups, and they're usually formed around discussion. So you will have a seminar leader who, again, it might be the same person who is lecturing to you, but they will lead the group discussion and you will move through particular points, a bit like the classes that you have now at A-level. And then at certain universities, you have these things called tutorials, and these are very, very small group discussions. It might be one-on-one, so just you and an academic, or it might be one-on-two, so one academic and two students, or it might be a little more. And this is really kind of intense, closely focused teaching. So you're directly responding to everything that they say to you. So a bit like your A-level teachers, these are taught by period specialist researchers. So people who really know, who actively publish and research the material that they're talking about. So in English literature, we tend to specialize in a particular period of English literary study. For example, mine's medieval literature. You also have specialists in Victorian literature, or more kind of conceptual specialists. So someone might choose to work exclusively on nature writing, for example. And these can be doctoral researchers, so people who are taking their PhDs, which are the highest form of exams that you can study for at a university. People who have received those doctorates, which we call doctors, or professors. And they're people who've been hanging around in the subject for a long time and become real kind of leaders in the profession. They're what professors are. Now, your teaching time, you'll come across this term a lot when you're researching different university courses, is referred to as contact hours. So that means the time that you spend in contact with your teachers, your tutors. So whether that's in lectures with lecturers, in seminars with seminar leaders, or in tutorials with those same people. Now, instead of following one particular exam syllabus, which might be set across the UK, each university sets their own syllabus. So that's why it's really important to look at what different universities are offering, because there's no one single English course that everybody takes. And you have far more autonomy as well. So whereas in your A-level studies, you might have been able to choose particular texts from a list, or maybe when you were doing coursework, you were able to have some degree of choice over that. There's a lot more autonomy over what you read and what you focus in on for your undergraduate study. Now, as you can imagine from that combination of lectures, seminars, and tutorials, it's up to you to record what you're hearing. And the most common way you'll do that is with note taking in a similar way that you would do now at A level, but you might not receive the same kind of handouts that you're used to receiving, or those prompts from your teacher which say, make notes as I play this video, or now we're going to be making a mind map about whatever this subject is. So it's worth taking a look at the different ways that people have come up with for taking effective notes. Some of you might already be familiar with this method that you can see outlined on the left-hand side of your screens. This is called the Cornell method of note taking, which is where you put a little Q column on the left-hand side, which is maybe where you put keywords. You put your notes in the middle at that main block there, and then you provide a summary of everything in your own words at the bottom. The next way is called the outline topic, where basically you start off in the left-hand margin, and the smaller and more detailed that topic becomes, the more you indent that paragraph. So you know that the material that you've got on the far right-hand side are those little points, maybe those really specific points of close reading that someone's told you about in a lecture. And then the other way, which I'm sure we're all familiar with, is mind mapping. Now, this can work really well if you're someone who responds to that kind of organization of ideas and you have lots of things going on in your mind at once, but they can be a little more difficult to organize. It's quite hard to tell where your thinking has been going if you have lots of mind maps. However, for some people, it works really well. The other thing that you might want to think about is how you're going to organize your notes. Now, I can tell you from experience that there's nothing worse than getting to the end of a course and finding that you just have a million bits of paper going everywhere, or all sorts of unhelpfully named Word documents called notes to lecture, and you've been to hundreds of lectures. So you might want to think about how you work best. Are you someone who finds it really helpful to handwrite your notes? I'm someone who still really enjoys writing with pen and paper. I find that I remember things far more easily when I'm writing things down manually. But for other people, they find it far easier to organize their notes, but in Google documents or Word documents and named folders. And then other people who are far more tech savvy than I am like to use particular apps, which you might have heard of, like Evernote or Notion. So these are kind of digital apps which help you organize your note taking, and you can mark up the folders in lots of different ways. They have digital whiteboards, things like that. So it's worth looking those up if you're someone who prefers to work on a laptop or a tablet. Now, this is another conversation you might be aware of that's happening in universities at the moment. Lectures, especially, are not typically recorded unless you have special permission to do so. So you are expected to physically turn up to those lectures, to sit in front of that person and hear them talk. You're also not allowed to record those lectures either in just an audio recording or as a video on your own. Neither is it encouraged that you use AI to do your note taking for you. And you might think that this is a bit prescriptive and a bit annoying. Why, when I could just listen to that lecture and pay attention to understanding it, why wouldn't I want AI to take their notes? So AI relies predominantly on probability, not accuracy. So if it doesn't understand a word that someone's saying, it will just put in what it thinks is most likely. You often lose the process of learning, which is important for things like comprehension, so understanding and memory. So you're not paying as much attention to things like prioritizing the important parts of what someone is saying, so you're able to write them down. So that part of understanding and forming memories of what you're listening to is lost. And you also lose your individualized creative response to what that person's saying. So AI obviously cannot take notes from your own brain as you are watching that lecture. And that's something that's really important in undergraduate study, and having your own responses, your own thoughts to text, not just always recording what someone else is doing. So I'll keep doing these slides, which are called stepping stones. So it's little things that you can do that you can think about in advance, which might help you transition. So the first thing is note taking and organization. So think about what you need to take notes in advance. So do you need to buy lots of beautiful stationery before you go to university? Do you need to download that note taking software? How will you organize them, and what layout works best for you? Because what works for your friend might not be the way that you learn best. Come ready to your seminar or tutorial, ready to discuss the material that you've been set. And I'll talk about reading in just a moment. Obviously, that kind of discursive setup where you're talking to other people in your class, you're talking to your seminar leader, some people can find that quite intimidating, and that's entirely normal, especially until you get used to it. So one thing that you can do is write down some questions or comments in advance of your session. So you have something in your back pocket in case you're called on to say, actually, I've been thinking about this. What do you think? And then you can learn from your peers as well as your seminar leaders. So if you're not sure that you've fully understood that lecture or you got all the notes down that you wanted to, you can ask a friend to have a debrief afterwards, and you can go for a coffee and talk about the material that's covered. So the next thing I'm going to be talking about, big in English literature degrees, as you can imagine, is reading. So for A-level, you usually have set texts for most of your courses. You'll have a selection of drama, of novels, of poems, and you might have some element of student choice, especially with those shorter texts. Your teacher does an awful lot of excellent work balancing that workload for you. So they might be deciding at which point in the term you're going to cover particular material to make sure that you don't have too much reading at once. And again, you might have those regular check-ins to make sure that you're keeping up with your reading. So maybe you'll be set reading particular chapters for homework. Now, in undergraduate study, that's a little bit different. So in some cases, you might be asked to read a novel a week, among other reading that you're being set. So the sheer volume of reading really kicks up. You'll be set primary and secondary literature. So that means the actual examples of literature that you're reading, that's primary reading, and then also critical responses to that literature, so what people think about it as well. You will often be reading from multiple time periods at once and multiple genres at once as well. And you will be asked to organise your own reading time. With your contact hours, there is the expectation that you come to that teaching time having already read those texts. Okay, so you come ready to discuss them, ready to learn more, not just to learn what that plot is about. So on these next few slides, I have pasted some images of what I and another lecturer usually teach, so you get an idea of the kind of reading that you might come across. So on the screen here is a page from a virtual learning environment that I use for teaching my foundation year students. And this is for one course on 1 week. So they're having to do 2 other courses as well. So this week, you can see in the primary reading section, I'd asked them to read a novel by a Native American author called Tommy Orange, called There, There. And then I'd also set 3 pieces of secondary reading. One's about, what's that, 38 pages long. This is about just less than 10 pages long. And then there's an interview with the author themselves that I've asked them to do, as well as kind of a pre-class activity to get them set up. So 1 novel and 3 articles is what I asked for 1 week for my English foundation year students. This page is taken from my first year course in Old and Middle English poetry. And you can see it's a little bit longer. I've broken it down in a different way as well. So in this week, they had to read 3 Old English poems called The Wanderer, The Ruin, and Wolf and Eadwecker. And then I also set 3 secondary pieces of reading. I also asked them to perform some translation work on this poem and to read about a particular element of Old English grammar too. So they had quite a lot of reading to do in preparation for this week. 3 Old English poems, translating part of one of those poems, 3 pieces of secondary reading, and a bit of reading about the English language as well. Now, don't be too intimidated by this one. This is from a second year course on Shakespeare. And don't worry, nobody was expected to read everything on this reading list. That's not what it's there for. This course is really interesting because the students have a lot more choice. So they got to decide which Shakespeare play they were going to read, and they had some pieces of secondary reading which they were set, and then they got to choose precisely which pieces of secondary reading that they wanted to do. So depending on the kind of essay they wanted to write, they could choose what worked best for them. This can look quite scary. It's a really big step up from A-level study, but there are definitely things that you can do to help make that easier. So the first thing is planning your reading time. Unlike in your A-level studies where maybe you were able to read everything in the summer before, or you could quite easily read some of those texts in a week before bed, you would need to plan in this reading time as part of your working week. So you can do things like set reading goals for each day or each week across these different modules. You can find ways of keeping notes. Obviously, with some longer novels, if you're reading things like Dickens, which are really long, it's quite easy to forget what's happening. So finding a way that you can remember where you are in that text and keep a note of what's going on. You could place tabs where specific key events are happening, or you could just keep a notebook on you on the side to note down what's happening in each chapter or scene. Or for shorter texts like poems, maybe you could close read them as you go so that you kind of have a better grasp of what's happening. The third thing you can do is really think practically about where you enjoy reading. I'm someone who loves reading in bed and likes to be cozy when reading, but other people are different. Some people like reading in coffee shops, some people can only read in absolute silence. So have a think in advance about what the best environment for your reading is. And then the last thing is reward systems. So keeping yourself motivated for completing significant bits of reading. And those can be things like doing a bit and then going for a walk or getting a drink or going for scrolling on social media. So you can do things that really keep that motivation up. I'm so sorry. I'm just going to pause for a moment to ask, Pravahi, can you hear music in the background of when I'm presenting?
No, I can't hear anything but you,
Oh,
fortunately,
excellent.
Eleanor.
This is just showing the vibrancy of student life. We've got a performance going on next door. So just to make sure. Excellent. I'll keep going. Slide. Excellent. Sorry about that, everyone. So the next logical step from reading is to move over to writing. So for A-level, you tend to have shorter word counts, maybe maximum your coursework might have been maybe 3,000 words at most. You might be taught to use particular structures in your writing. I remember when I was doing my A-level, I was taught to structure my essays around PEEC, point, evidence, explain, conclusion, or you might have other kind of ideal methods that are used in your school. And then your homework essays are, you might be able to write them comfortably in 1 or 2 evenings or a weekend. They don't take too much time to write. The changes that you'll experience at undergraduate study are longer word counts and sometimes multiple deadlines at once. So maybe you have several essays expected in 1 week. There's a greater emphasis on argument and on independence of thought from your A-level writing. You're also expected to show something called engagement with criticism. Engagement is a term that will come up quite a lot. And that means that you're not just using critical reflections in your work, you're not just quoting someone, but you're really getting to grips and picking it apart. You're saying which parts you do agree with or you don't agree with. You're saying how it's applicable to this piece of work or how it actually doesn't work at all. So you're getting really stuck into what other people are saying. You'll develop your analysis and writing skills that you've already started in A-level. So you'll pick up new things and develop the skills you already have. There's no one style of essay anymore. So while you may still receive tips, things like point, evidence, explain still work really well, but there's no one excellent way of producing an essay. You have a lot more freedom about how you shape those. And often the essays that you're set as part of submitted work, it would be very stressful to write them in one evening. So writing 1,500 words is not an easy thing to do in one sitting. So it would take you a lot longer to write those things. So how do you write to those longer word counts? Well, you need to think about how you'd break down the constituent parts of writing an essay, which are usually formed of researching it, planning it, writing it, and then editing it afterwards. And this is what I usually do with my own work still now, is maybe writing something over the course of a month in between your other work, and thinking about what each week might look like for you, what your primary goal is for each of those weeks. So for here, I've put week 1, you want to collect your primary quotations, start close reading them, and take notes on secondary reading to help develop your own ideas. Week 2, you might want to start organizing those things into a structure that makes sense for an essay. So you're planning paragraph topics and placing the evidence where it best fits. Week 3, you'd be getting to doing that actual writing. So writing up those paragraphs one by one. I usually leave my introduction and conclusion to the very end, as sometimes I find my argument has changed by the time I've put all of my evidence in. And then in week 4, it's editing that writing and checking on the presentation. Now, this all comes with practice, the different parts of this. It looks a lot when you break it down like that. And on some occasions, you might not have 4 weeks to write that essay. It might be a lot shorter, in some cases, a week, in which case you would adapt it to that. So my final kind of core aspect that we're going to look at is assessment. So for A-levels, you have practice essays as homework. Maybe you have mock exams in your college or sixth form. You're often assessed through a combination of exams and coursework. Your coursework might be marked by your teacher, but usually your exams are marked by external examiners. They're sent away to be marked by other A-level English teachers. The marking criteria is set by the exam board themselves, and the grade boundaries are usually only set after marking. So they might decide only, 5% of people might get an A star in any given year. And so that will be the top 5% of whatever marks they're getting given. So they do it after the marks have been collected. In undergraduate study, this becomes very different. So you do still write practice essays. Not everything you write is assessed. And you still do a combination of exams and coursework. And this can really differ between universities. So you might do things called closed book exams, which is where you're not allowed to take books in with you. So you've closed the books, you've walked away. You might have things called open book exams, where, funnily enough, you're allowed to open the books in your exams. You can bring them in with you. Take-home exams, which tend to be where you're given a deadline to complete an exam paper that might be 1 or 2 weeks. So you go away and work on those exam questions, submit them by a deadline, and then coursework, very similar to the kind of thing you produce now. Now, almost everything is marked internally by the academics at your institution, by English specialists, and they're checked by external examiners. So to make sure that your university is marking at the right level, they send little bits away, sample scripts, to say, do you think we've done all right on this? And they'll come back and say, yes, I think you have, or you've been too harsh, or you've been too generous. Now, the marking criteria, instead of being set by an exam board, is set by the awarding body, so the university, wherever that degree is taking place. So universities design their own mark schemes, although having said that, they often settle on very, very similar qualities and skills across different universities. And then your marks are called slightly different things as well. So we call them class marks. You might have heard this in films or television, where they refer to someone getting a first-class degree or a 2-1 degree. So all essays are marked out of 100, and this doesn't really change. And then you can see, as I put on the bullet points on the screen, that different marks fall into different bands. You'll notice that it will look a lot lower than you're used to at A-level study. And that's because the whole thing is kind of skewed lower. So you're looking at marks of 80 plus That's kind of a clear indication that your work at undergraduate level might be of a publishable quality. But yeah, 60 and above, 60 and above is really good work, 70 and above is excellent work. So I thought I'd show you some of the things that they place in the Oxford Undergraduate English Handbook, which contains the mark scheme that they look at for English exams and coursework. So you can see here it's broken into 4 different sections. You've got engagement, argument, information, organisation, and presentation. So engagement is all about how well do you know the field and the literature that you're engaging with? Are you engaging deeply and with sophistication? Do you understand what's at stake with the question that's being asked? And are you answering the question that's in front of you or one that you'd hoped you'd have? The argument is about what you're trying to prove. What is the point of your essay? What is it trying to say? It's not necessarily a winding explanation mind map form of on one particular subject, but what if you had to distill it into one sentence? What are you trying to say? And they want this to show independence as well, so of your own thinking. Information refers to the quality of your evidence and your knowledge. So is it relevant? Is it accurate? Is it really precise and detailed as well? And then organisation and presentation is the quality of your writing. So are you writing well and does it look nice on the page? Is it organised in a way your reader can understand what you're saying really quickly? Or are you using a lot of random fonts and different font sizes and your footnotes are all over the place? That makes it really difficult for someone to navigate your writing. So things you can do to help. One thing is kind of a mental reframing, often because you'll all be exceptionally clever. You're probably used to, from your A-level teachers, receiving lots of ticks or good and excellent written at the side, with also some points for improvement. You tend to get far more points for improvement at undergraduate level. And the way to reframe that is not that you're doing badly, but that those comments represent engagement with your work. Someone's sitting down and they're really looking at what you're saying and what you're arguing. And they really want to show that they've understood and they want to help you to be a better writer. So reframing comments as engagement, not criticism. The next thing is to check the assessment criteria and to keep it on file. So make sure when you're editing your essays, you're hitting all of those key aspects. You haven't forgotten to do something just because you didn't check the marking criteria. And the next one is save any written feedback that you receive, no matter if it's related to one course that's from an entirely different literary period from the other. All of that feedback is really helpful in making your work stronger. So every time you're writing a new essay, you want to refer back to the feedback that you got on the last one to help make it as strong as possible. This is one of my favorite paintings of a librarian made out of books, by the way, just to brighten up the slides. So next we're going to look at finding the best undergraduate English course for you. As I said, every university has a different English course, which will look at different texts and be organised in a different way, although there are plenty of similarities too. Things you can do on your own with your laptop or your phone are looking remotely at what you can do and where you might want to do it. So you can do things which I'm sure you're aware of looking at the UCAS website, which lists every undergraduate course in the UK. Looking at individual university websites once you've found places that offer the course that you want to study. Looking at league tables, very famous ones include The Guardian, Times Higher Education, and the Complete University Guide. Now, the only little caveat I would put here is these deserve to be taken with quite a significant pinch of salt. So league tables can be really helpful in understanding certain information, but ultimately every league table has different priorities that we don't always know about. And the best university is the university that is right for you. So somebody's first choice might not be yours. And then also talking to friends, families, teacher recommendations as well about where they've enjoyed going or where they think you might enjoy best. And then things that you can do in person include going to open days. where the universities say, come on, you can all come and have a look. You can speak to our researchers and teachers. You can speak to our students. Come and see our facilities. Come and see our accommodation. These are always free. There's road shows, which is kind of the reverse of that. That's where the universities come to you, and usually they'll be in your local area, and lots of different sixth forms and colleges will be invited to come and see particular universities at stalls. And then the other thing is subject experience days, which is where you can come into a university and experience a bit of the teaching that you might expect at undergraduate level. These are usually advertised by individual university websites or college websites. I thought about some of the questions that you might want to ask at an open day to make sure that an English literature or English literature and language course is right for you. So the first one is, how much choice over the subjects I study do I have? So you might want to ask, when do you get to choose your papers or units? How much choice do you have? And what do I have to take to pass my degree? How will I be assessed? So do you prefer exams or coursework? And what do you have to do as part of this degree? Is there any way to make sure that, for example, you can have more coursework? Does this English course offer units and papers in other subjects? So do you want to incorporate creative writing or art history or theatre studies as part of your degree? And is there scope to do that at this university? And also, does this English course offer the opportunity to travel if I want to? Can you do a year or a term abroad at a different university to experience what it's like there too? But remember, your friends and family might have different priorities for you, as do league tables. So the best university, as I said before, is ultimately the one that is right for you. This is Samuel Johnson, who started the Oxford English Dictionary. And we're going to be talking now about preparing for undergraduate English studies. So things and resources that you can look at now, which might help you decide if English is what you want to study, and to give you things to talk about in your personal statement, if that's how you wanted to use it. Often students talk about some anxieties that they have, and they don't quite know precisely what they're interested in. They're just interested in English literature. And these are some of the questions that I've been asked at open days or subject exploration days, and my responses to them usually. So the first one is, my favourite books are all young adult novels. Is that a problem? My response to this is not necessarily, but engage critically with these forms. Sometimes the books that you read when you were 11, 12, 13 are not the same books that you find really inspiring at 17. So check that they are indeed what you hold up as being the epitome of English literary talent. You can also think about them in a different way. So why is it that these forms of literature are popular with young adult readers? Are there particular themes, particular ways of writing that are used to engage this audience? And then you can also think more broadly about genre connections. So can you find other romance texts or dystopian texts or fantasy texts that are more literary? I put that in inverted commas because literary is an invented category, but perhaps have accrued more prestige. Are there any texts which have inspired that person's writing that you could look at? I struggle to read long books. This is really difficult, especially with how ubiquitous phones are now. Our attention spans really suffer. We call this reading resilience, the ability to read longer texts, to be able to concentrate on them and to keep returning to them. You can start this small, so maybe reading for 30 minutes straight every night and not checking your phone until you've completed that set period of time. Building that into a routine will mean that you're able to read a lot faster and longer works really quickly. If you're really struggling with that, something to hook you can be trying short story collections and novellas, which are naturally shorter works, and kind of building up your reading resilience from there. Then the other one is, I only enjoy this one particular genre that I'm always reading. What you can do for that is try blended genre examples, which don't clearly fit into one genre or another. So maybe you really enjoy fantasy and you struggle to find things outside of that. But try fantasy realism, which is offering something slightly different. And you can always work outwards from one author. So maybe you have a favorite author. I can guarantee that they probably weren't always working in one particular genre. And you can find other examples from their corpus, so their body of work that you can read. Also important in undergraduate study is developing your own, what we might refer to as critical voice. So being independent, knowing how to articulate what you think. And some students say, I don't know what I think. Everybody is cleverer than I am. Why would I disagree with someone who's written all of this criticism and is a lifetime expert on the subject? So what you can do is to get into the practice of having an opinion, is note down your thoughts after reading a text. Just give yourself time to do that, your own reflections, and they can be as small or as vague as you like. And then you could compare them to reviews that you find online. Do you find people agree or disagree with what you're writing? That doesn't necessarily mean that what you think is wrong, but it can be interesting to see points of comparison on what you've picked up on and someone else hasn't. Who can have an opinion on a text, and whose opinion should I trust? So everyone can have an opinion on a text, and there are lots of places where you can look for reviews, including social media and websites online. But you can think critically about this too. So look for expertise. Are they an academic, a journalist, an author themselves? Or do they have some kind of lived experience or identity, which means that they're particularly appropriate to go to as an authority on this subject? So whose opinion matters most to the subject at hand? And then often I hear that people who are interested in literary studies are also really interested, they are creative writers as well. Is that relevant? Absolutely, that's relevant, but you want to frame it carefully in a way that's also useful for being a critic, which is what you are when you do undergraduate literary study. So you might want to think about something we call creative critical responses, which is where you're producing creative work, maybe you're writing poetry or prose, but you're doing it in a way that's thinking really carefully about the texts that came before it or what people have said about it. So, for example, you might be rewriting an old English poem using the same literary techniques and same ideas, but doing it in modern English. You'd then be able to talk about the differences that you can see between the two and what elements you kept in and what elements you decided to cut. I'll make sure that this is sent to you afterwards. You're welcome to have the PowerPoint. But there are lots of supercurricular English resources that you can use. So extracurricular refers to the things that you do that go beyond the curriculum. Supercurricular are the things you do which kind of correspond to it or have a direct relation. So for reading, if you don't quite know where to go, you can have a look at reading challenges online. Often literary prizes organise reading challenges. So you might have heard of the Booker Prize 2025. They will list all of their nominated long list and short list authors. And you could have a go at reading some of those at kind of the cutting edge of literary talent at the moment. There's a really good quiz by the publisher Faber and Faber of what should I read next. So if you're really stuck for options and you don't know what you'd find exciting, you can answer these quiz questions and they'll direct you to a book that they think works for you. Swap books with your friends and read their favourites. Often we'll listen to our friends talk endlessly about this book that we have absolutely no idea about. Summer is a really good time to borrow that book and then you can swap reviews. Please note that you don't have to try and blast through all of the classics of English literature before you go to university, or even when you're at university. There are just so many you'd never get through them all. But do push yourself and think about the areas that you really want to improve in, or those works that you've never really had time to read but now really want to. Some of these things you might find difficult at first. Maybe the language is a bit strange or the subject matter doesn't initially grab your interest, but it's worth sticking with it to see if you can get something out of it. There are lots of podcasts and radio programs that you can listen to. BBC Radio 4 is a really good place to look for these. So they have Open Book, which is 30-minute episodes with authors, Book Club, where readers talk to acclaimed authors about their books, and Talking Books, which is a bit like Open Book, but it has a global outlook as well. So they really make sure that they're talking to authors from across the world. Oxford English faculty runs the Great Writers Inspire podcast. So they interview academics about particularly well-known authors. And then the publication, the London Review of Books, also has a close reading podcast where they really drill down into particular texts. And then there's also lots of things that you can practically do at little to no cost. So you can join your local library and request books that you want to read. Also watch out for their literary publications. So the Times Literary Supplement and the London Review of Books contain reviews of all of the latest books that have come out, and they're a really good place to start. You could keep a reading diary to note down your thoughts. Often when you're avid readers, which I'm sure many of you are, you're racing through books so quickly, you probably don't remember what half of them are about. I know that's definitely me most of the time. So keep a kind of reading journal of what you think as you're going along that you can refer back to when you come to writing your personal statement, for example. You can look up university-sustained contact programmes and study days. These are often run by individual Oxford and Cambridge colleges, but by other universities as well. So I'd like to make a shout out to Balliol College's Floria Access programme. I'm currently teaching an undergraduate student in English here who came up through that programme, and she had an absolutely fantastic time on them. You can visit free art exhibitions, concerts, and author talks in your local areas. Often there's a lot of intersections between different kinds of art, like visual arts, musical arts. So it's worth attending those just to kind of spark your interest and see the different kind of connections you can make. And then if you're feeling very committed, you can enter essay writing competitions. So I've just listed a few links here. You've got the Gould Prize, the Estelle Prize, Humanities Writing Competition, and the Wolf Essay Prize. They all have different dates and kind of different remits for what they're looking for, but they're a really good place to start to look for opportunities to get your work read by academics at university and receive some feedback on it. And it's also fun to kind of have a research project that extends beyond what you're studying at A-level. So that's the end of my presentation here. Thank you so much for listening. And I believe we still have time for some questions, which I'm very happy to take.
Thank you so much, Ellen. And that was absolutely fascinating. I can only think I wish I'd heard you talk before, I went to university and had the benefit of all that wisdom. So fantastic. I have just put something in the chat to start off as well. I have put our supercurricular resource guide, which is of course not a to-do list. None of these things are a to-do list, are they? They are a dip into, find something that grabs you, and if you don't enjoy it, stop. So please do write any questions you have, and Eleanor is here to answer them, and I will be support in the background.
Just give you a few seconds to start typing. It also might work. You're very welcome to raise your hand if you would like to. You can use that function if you find that quicker. Hi, Anna, thank you very much for your question. How much of the Oxford English undergraduate course involves close reading? Thank you, Anna. That's a really good question. So close reading is kind of a foundational practice of English literary study. It didn't come out of nowhere. I didn't know this until I did some further research a few years ago. Close reading has not always existed as a mode of literary practice. It developed out of a certain kind of scholarship. And yeah, for anyone who doesn't know, close reading is that kind of reading that you do where you're really picking apart how individual words and individual literary techniques are contributing to a set passage or a text as a whole. So that's pretty regular across all of the courses, but you're not there's no kind of element, there's no exam on close reading. It just forms part of what we do across lots of different periods of literary study. But we also look more broadly at things like how a particular text fits into a generic category or how it responds to particular philosophical movements. So if you're someone who's not particularly keen on just doing lots and lots of close reading, that's not the only type of reading that we do. Great. And I hope that answered your question. Do let me know if you have any follow-ups as well. So Mia has asked, how would a degree in English literature differ to a comparative literature degree? So usually, as far as I'm aware, and I don't want to misspeak here. So a comparative literature degree means that you often study other works that are not written in English as well. These can be works that have been translated into English. For example, works from Russian authors like Dostoevsky, they wrote in Russian and had to be translated into English. You wouldn't cover them in an English literature degree because they weren't originally written in that language. So that's what it would enable you to do. Some of these comparative literature degrees, you might be reading those texts in their original languages as well, but that really varies between universities. I can see another one from Bex. Are there any topics that you would recommend reading about for English literature supercurricular or to generally prepare for undergraduate? Oh, the world is your oyster with this question, Bex. The list is as tall as you are. Post-colonialism is an excellent place to start, as you've listed there. I would start off by Googling or looking up literary theories and having a look and seeing what interests you, because I think that will be the most important thing to do. You will often have a more detailed response to something that you find exciting. So I would recommend, that looking up different literary theories or different topics and then working from that out. But post-colonialism is a really good place to start. Yeah. And then for Emily, how do you differentiate between an English literature course and an English literature and language course? Yeah, really good question. So often there's a lot of flexibility and it's a bit blurry between the two because, of course, if you're reading English literature, then it is in the English language and you're learning lots of things about how that language works as well. So an English language degree, however, often involves a lot more of what we call linguistics. So the way that language actually works. How do the different component parts of language fit together to make us understand a text? So if it's an English literature and language course, it's likely that you're doing some literary study and some linguistic study at all as well. But there might be flexibility between how much you do of each. Would I be able to do units in philosophy alongside a literature degree at Oxford? Also, are exams handwritten and how long do they last? So to answer your first question, so that is quite dependent on which college you choose to go to. Pravahi, you might be more clued up here than I am. I'm not sure if English and philosophy is a joint honours that is offered at Oxford.
It isn't. No, sorry about that.
That's a clear answer on that one. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're entirely uncoupled. So philosophical concepts are something that's drawn into literary study quite often. You'd actually be quite hard pressed to find an English literature degree that didn't include philosophical theories at some point in your literary study, if not quite a lot of it. In terms of are exams handwritten and how long do they last? So at Oxford in particular, this varies quite a lot between different universities. Oxford in particular for English, they tend to be around 3 hours long. And whether they're typed or handwritten, I believe in English, we've just moved to a system of them now all being typed. However, this really varies across different universities. And there are also particular things depending on if you have a particular learning disability that would mean that actually it's better for you to have those exams, to type those exams. That's absolutely something that is accommodated for at different universities as well. Question from Anna, which English modules are selected / how are modules selected for those doing joint honours? Again, I'm so sorry for answering the beginning of questions in the same way of, it really varies. It really varies across different joint subject degrees and also at different universities. But you can find this information out quite easily by looking at different university course websites, which should show you when the kind of option of choices comes in and / how much scope do you have. But I know that I've taught a couple of English and history and English and language students this year, and they got here at Oxford, at Balliol, they had some choice over the modules that they were taking, even in their first year. And then just scrolling down. Natasha, does Oxford look at any forms of modern literature as well as classic? Absolutely, absolutely, 100% yes. You do the whole lot from 500 AD up until 2025 or later when you start. There is absolutely no kind of distinction of good literature stops at a particular period. We look at written forms from everything that falls under writing in English, and we often problematize quite a lot of those ideas as well. So what do we perceive as being literature and what is just writing? What do we perceive as being of good quality or not good quality? So yes, absolutely, you study lots of different things, not just what we might understand as classic literature. Anna again. No, not at all. You do not need to apologise for your questions. As the Oxford English course is called English Language and Literature, does this mean it involves some study of linguistics as well, or is it mainly study of literature? So this depends on the choices that you make and what you decide to study as part of your degree. So all first years here doing English at Oxford have to take a little part of their degree in the first year, which is called Introduction to English Language. So you would do a little bit of it. You also do some language learning at all universities who do Old and Middle English. So that kind of teaches you some of the rudiments of English language as well. So I think I've got time to just take one more question, and I'll take the question from Samuel here. I think you may have mentioned this earlier, but I just want to clarify whether or not there would be translations of texts from other languages. So in an English literature degree, unless it's specified, there tends not to be, because that doesn't fit explicitly in the boundaries of English literature that is originally written in that language. So while we might look at some translated text, because it's not originally written in that language, that might be Spanish literature or French literature or Russian literature, doesn't fall within the precise category of what we're doing. Pravahi, do I have time for any more questions, or should I draw things to a close?
I think you could probably do one or two. I'm just putting some links in about some of the stuff I can help with introduce written work while you talk.
Okay. So Annie's got a question about written work there. I think some of Pravahi's links will work really well for you there. Alex, is it worth looking at Oxford College's academics tutors that are experts on areas that of interest that align with yours? Will this influence your application? It will not influence your application if you're expressing an interest in a particular subject that an academic has. What we're interested in is what you think, not what you think of us, if you know what I mean. So you don't necessarily need to flatter us in your personal statements. However, if you have read something that someone's written that you find genuinely interesting, then of course that absolutely makes sense to mention it. You should also bear in mind that your thinking is likely to change quite a lot over the course of your undergraduate degree, and the same things that you're interested in while you're developing your personal statement and while you're developing your written work might not necessarily be the same things that you are interested in when you go to study it. So there's absolutely not any bias of, oh, I like modernism and this person is an expert in modernism, so I'll definitely say that doesn't influence your application. And I'll do this question from Mia. How is the teaching like for Old and Middle English? Are reading lists for this component shorter than if it was Victorian literature, for example? Since I imagine it must be complicated to get used to the language. Yes, Mia, you're absolutely right. So at Oxford, but at any university, there is no expectation that you will have even heard of Old or Middle English literature before you start at university. There is no, you don't need to worry about that whatsoever. That is my job to make sure that it's as kind of interesting and engaging as it can be to help you learn those skills. So, especially in your first year of undergraduate study, your tutors at any university will be really careful to not just plunge you in the deep end with everything. So there'll be a big step up in workload, but you're not doing it alone. You're not doing it unsupported. So it is a little bit more complicated to get used to the language, but students tend to be more than capable of being able to manage that.
Brilliant. Well done, Eleanor. Thank you so much. Well done, all the students who've joined, and some great questions there. Hopefully some of the links will also support you. Do remember, we will send you this recording, so you'll have the information to look back on as well. So thank you very much, everyone, and we will hopefully see you again, perhaps at Open Days. Thank you, Eleanor.
Thank you very much, everyone. It was lovely to meet your initials on the screen.